Let's bring them both in. Roshena, was I too tough on Sally Cap over this listing of Melbourne going back to number 3 on livable cities?
Well, look, I'm a proud Melburnian and I'm delighted by this ranking, and I say that as someone who grew up in Sydney. But there is something I agree with you about, Steve, and that's the challenges that are facing our city, and they are huge. An injecting room would be, I think, a disaster for our city. We have to get our transport settings right. Now, they're my personal views. They're not the views of the majority of my councillor colleagues. But on top of that, we've got a state government that is broke, that can no longer finance major projects. So Melburnians have a lot to be worried about when it comes to the future livability of Melbourne. And I think that every citizen of this state and every leader at every level of government needs to keep the pressure on to keep Melbourne livable.
We'll talk to Ollie in a moment about where he thinks Perth should be. But Roshena, the point I'm making here is, you know, these lists are all well and good. But like you, I'm a proud Melburnian, Victorian. I grew up in South Australia, but I've lived more in Victoria than I have anywhere else after 16 years in living in Sydney as well. All you need to do is walk around the city to see that this is not the most livable city in Australia. It isn't. I mean, I go to Sydney and I walk through the revamped Wynyard Station, for example, that leads you through the Barangaroo. I'm sure you've done it. You look at Sydney's toll road network now that's working brilliantly. Melbourne, the Flinders Street station's disgraceful. Southern Cross is empty. The graffiti's everywhere. The bike lanes don't work. And I know you've sensibly voted against some of these things. So to see the Lord Mayor out there this morning on Sunrise saying, "We're back, baby," I nearly threw up.
Yeah, look, I mean, I drive through the city regularly and see the bike lanes absolutely empty while traffic is bumper to bumper. And at a time when we're trying to get everyone back to the CBD, we've got to make it as easy as possible. So you're right, we've got to do better there. That's my personal view. But when it comes to things like major infrastructure projects, the city has been strangled by construction works that the state government is struggling to pay for, but they are over time, over budget, and they mean that large parts of Melbourne have come to a standstill. So we need to see better project management from the state government, and it's got to get out of this debt because it is going broke and it can't even deliver the projects that it promised Victorians.
Yeah, they're all over budget, they're late, and half the train network is going to be shut down for the next 2 weeks. People can't catch a train. Now, Oliver, I think that if you really looked at the cities of Australia and worked out where was the most livable cities, I would nominate probably Adelaide because it's a little cheaper, the real estate there, than Perth. But if you go to the great city of Perth, as I was a couple of months ago, I mean, the standard of living and the way that people in Perth get to live their lives is so much better than Sydney or Melbourne. It's not funny.
Exactly, Steve, and just listening to your conversation with Roshena about Melbourne, I'm saying get on the plane, baby, and get over here because we are celebrating today, Steve, in that livability index. Perth has surged from 25 to number 12 in the world. This is Australia's paradise, and sometimes we are the country's best-kept secret, but more and more people want to live here, Steve, and you're right. You take a home in Melbourne, divide that by 2, and that's probably what you're paying for here in Perth in the equivalent location. Everything's only about 20 or 30 minutes away from wherever you live. We've got a great public transport network that's expanding at the moment. We're the only state in surplus. The Golden West is where you want to be. We do have the similar challenges of the fact that you can't really get a rental property at the moment and everybody's moving here because there's jobs galore. But Perth and the lifestyle, the quality of life, Steve, there is something to be said for what we have here in Western Australia. And as you know, I spent the first part of my life in Sydney, but there's so many opportunities here in Perth, and bringing up 2 young boys here in Perth as well, the lifestyle and the opportunities are just amazing.